Okay, so I realized that I have multiple story times to do. Um, I still have to do the Runeterra Invitational story time, but that's not going to be today. Today we're just going to do the Flesh and Blood Road to Nationals one, and then maybe tomorrow we'll do the LOR Invitational. I just honestly completely forgot that I was supposed to do that still. All right, so this last weekend on Saturday, I had a Road to Nationals for Flesh and Blood. And basically, what that means is it's a qualifying tournament that if you finish top 4, you are now qualified for the Nationals event, right? And if you finish first, you get a gold foil, which is usually worth like $700 to $1,000 or something like that. Not too bad, right? And I have a local store, and this is the only Road to Nationals this local store has. Every store gets like one if they can qualify for it. And so this is like my hometown Nationals, right? It's like the hometown advantage, home turf and everything. So I'm pretty excited to be able to go. And I decide to play Kano, which if you've watched some of my other story times, you know is the combo deck of Flesh and Blood, the wizard, right? Kano plays out kind of similarly to like Storm in Magic the Gathering. Or Dredge. Well, it plays out kind of like Storm, but the way it plays against things is more like Dredge, if that makes any sense. Like how you need specific pieces to be able to combat Dredge. It's like that, right? And so if people know there's going to be a lot of Kanos, then they'll bring what's called like Arcane Barrier, the equipment that allows them to mitigate some of the damage that he does, right? Or maybe some other hate pieces. And I am a well-known Kano enjoyer, especially at my locals. I'm the only wizard player at my locals, so people know that if they go to a tournament where I'm going to be there, you should expect wizard, basically, right? And it's my local store, so obviously I'm going to be there, and I'm probably going to play Kano. So I'm like kind of rushing to get there. The site said 1:30, but it was apparently wrong. So I got a message halfway through my trip out there saying, "Hey, are you almost here?" And I was like, "Yeah, I am, but I have like 30 minutes before the event starts." And they go, "Yeah, it's supposed to start at 1, not 1:30. There was a mistake." And I was like, "Okay, great." So everyone else is there already. I pull up. It's like 1 o'clock, and I have to like scramble to make my deck list. And I walk in, and a bunch of people turn and look at me, and they don't say anything, which is kind of weird. They just turn to look at me, all my locals. You know, normally they go like, "Hey, what's up, man?" But they turn and they look at me, and then they turn and they all look at one person, which was really weird to see from my point of view, right? And then they all turn, they look at one person, and he goes, "I thought he wasn't going to be here." Apparently what had happened was the one guy saw one of my videos or streams or something and thought that I was going to be out of town. So he told everyone else that I was going to be out of town and I wasn't going to be there. So people didn't pack the requisite necessary hate as much as they could have, right? So everyone was like, "What do you mean he's here? You told me he wasn't going to be." And that was very funny. But yeah, scrambling to like get my deck list submitted and everything, write it all out. I have like not enough cards. I only have 79 cards on me, not 80, right? But decks are like 80 cards, so I just write down a random card as my 80th. I'm just like Ironhide Gauntlet, right? I don't have one on me, but I just wrote it down. Whatever, no big deal. Round 1. I'm looking around, and there's a couple of matchups I don't really want to see. One is Boost Dash, which is like kind of non-existent now. There's not a lot of Boost Dash players because it gets eaten up by the KOs and stuff like that. But I'm looking around, and our local Prism enjoyer is here. And Prism, I know this because I've been playing a lot of Prism, and I obviously play a lot of Kano, is basically unwinnable. It's so bad. It might be the worst matchup in Flesh and Blood. Kano into Prism is so bad. And we're sitting there and we're joking, and everyone's like, "Oh yeah, there's only one Prism. He's not, just don't hit him, bro. Just don't run into him." Round one, load the pairings, boom, Prism player. So we're up against by far our worst matchup in the entire game, round one, which is brutal because you really don't want to lose the first round, because if you do, your pairings are your tiebreakers are just worse. That's just how like card games work. If you lose early, your tiebreakers are worse. So I'm playing and I'm sitting there bemoaning my fate, right? I'm like, oh my God, I have to play against the Prism player. Bro, this matchup's so bad. Whine, right? And the Prism player is like, yeah, I heard it's really good, but or really good for me, but like I don't really play against Kano. The only time I play against Kano is when I play against you. And I don't ever play him when we show up to like play locals, because I'm not going to sit down in front of the 90-10 matchup and be like, hey, why don't you have a couple games? Right? That sounds miserable. I'd rather die. So he's like, yeah, I don't really have a lot of practice against Kano. And I was like, oh, that's nice. So what makes Prism so bad? So Prism has 32 health instead of the normal 40. Kano has 30. Which you'd go like, oh, your combo deck should be able to kill a lot easier. And you'd be right. Except Prism does this thing where she flips angels. She gets to put these things on the board called figments and then flip them into heralds or angels. Flips them into angels. And they're basically 4/4 allies. But they have this mechanic called ward, which means if you would take damage, instead prevent 4 of that damage and the angel dies. Which normally isn't that big of a deal if you're like attacking Prism a lot. So most decks like care about the angels, but it's not that big of a deal. The issue is with Kano, you're doing one source of damage, one source of damage, one source of damage, and then in your combo turn, you have like a multiplicative effect. You have cards that say, for how much damage I've dealt, add that damage to other sources of damage. It's called Aether Wildfire. And that's your big combo piece. But if your opponent has angels and you Aether Wildfire them, the angel soaks up the Aether Wildfire. And that's bad. So you have to keep the board clear of angels. But every time they hit you with what's called a herald, they get to make a figment and then flip it into an angel for free. And heralds attack for way above their normal like cost because they have a drawback. The drawback is if you block them with a 6 or more power attack, the attack just disappears. They're illusionists. They're phantasmal. If you put like a 6+ attack, they just poof, it's gone. You don't take any damage. The herald doesn't hit. The issue, Kano doesn't run any attacks. Any attacks. None. I have one in my sideboard, and it's for the Kano mirror, but I brought it in just hoping that I could fix this. So you are screwed because you can't properly block heralds because you don't have attacks, and you're screwed because the angels completely invalidate your game plan, which you can't deal with because you don't have small attacks to deal with the angels. And if the angels stick around, you can't do your multiplicative damage, meaning you can't win the game. It's horrible matchup, right? I do have some, not tech, it's just like the only way you could possibly fight through this, and that's use sideboard in the weapon Waning Moon, which basically means if you throw a spell, you can spend some extra resources to shoot with the staff as well. It does like 2 damage or like 3 on your opponent's turn. And it's definitely the worst weapon for Kano, but it's good in this instance because you can be like, okay, spell, hold priority, activate my staff. And if the staff hits, the angel dies and then the spell will hit, right? It doesn't make the matchup good. It just makes the matchup not the worst thing on the planet. It's just the second worst thing on the planet. So we start playing. And I'm chipping in and stuff. I'm doing a little bit of damage. And my opponent's doing this weird thing where he's like attacking with the heralds and then he's hitting me and he's getting the figments. It's like turn 0. And my opponent just goes like turn 1, and he just goes like red Wartune Herald, and I block 7. Like I block 6 plus the tunic, and they just red Wartune Heralds me again, and I'm like, dope. And it hits, and he goes and gets a figment. But he doesn't flip it. He elects to not flip the figment. And I'm like, huh, that's weird. And this kind of keeps happening. He's a good player. My opponent's a very good player, but he like clearly doesn't really know how the Kano matchup works. So how the Kano matchup works, Well, how Prism works. If you're smart, you sometimes need to be cautious about flipping your angels because you want to get the most value out of them. You don't always just want to ooga booga mindless flip them. But if you're playing against Kano, ooga booga mindless flipping angels is actually the best thing you could do. Because if you just keep flipping angels every single turn, I can't keep up. But my opponent 5-heads himself into not flipping his angels very often. So he just builds up an army of figments, and not very many angels, and I'm able to be chipping him down on my turn a bunch. So I get him down to like 10 or 11, and I'm like, oh my god, I can do this, right? I can do this. Now I had to get very fortunate to even be in this position. I had to hit like a bunch of tomes off the top and things like that. But it's getting to the point where I could possibly win. My opponent puts lethal on the stack, and it's time for me to pull the trigger. I Kano some stuff. You know, I got tome on top, draw some cards. And my opponent does the helmet trick where you can sacrifice the helmet to put a herald in your soul, and you go get a figment, and you can instant speed an angel or whatever. This is very good. However, the helmet also just says Spell Void 2, which is also very good in the matchup. So you're seeing that Prism is just so bad for Kano. But my opponent does it to get this card called Figment of Judgment, which basically says when it ETBs, you target something in someone's banish zone and you can turn it face down. How Kano works is you activate his hero ability, you can banish the top card of your deck, and you can then play that at instant speed. That's kind of how he combos, right? So my opponent gets Figment of Judgment. I have a judge call asking like, hey, how does this work? Does he have to target immediately? Does he not target until after, like, do I have a window to respond after the targeting, basically? The judge is like, yeah, you do. So it hits the battlefield. My opponent targets the spell, and I just look at him, and then I just cast the spell. I didn't get, like, max value out of it, but I can cast the spell at instant speed. So I just, like, spell? And he's like, banish that spell? And I'm like, cast it? And he's like, yeah, that's pretty good. And I end up just stealing the game. We start 1-0 against the worst matchup in the entire game. 1-0. Let's go. It's only 5 rounds of Swiss. Not too bad. And then it cuts to top 8. I'm feeling on top of the world. Right. I am stoked. Absolute robbery. Yeah, there's no world I should be 1-0. I should be 0-1 every single time here. I sit down for round 2, and my opponent's playing Kasai, which is not a real matchup, basically. Do you think best of 3 would improve the game? No, I think best of 1 in Flesh and Blood is actually very good. And I did not say that before I started playing. I was like, best of 1, what the fuck? But it's actually quite good. Okay, so I sit down against Kasai, who's a warrior, and the warrior, her ability is built around playing a lot of reds and yellows, which means that she has low resources all the time. And you have to pitch resources to block Kano's damage. You can't just put cards in front of it because he's arcane damage. That is the cards that I was talking about you have to bring to be able to deal with him, is equipment with arcane barrier. Kasai doesn't really have any naturally, and she's really bad at using AB. So basically, my opponent just presents AB1 and gets blown up. You know, they're just like, what are you going to do? I could pack a bunch of arcane barrier, but like, they asked me, they're like, is that even good? And I'm like, no, because you can't use it. Your deck's so resource intensive. And you just don't have the resources. So we start off 2-0, which is really, really nice. Round 3, I play against a Dromai player who doesn't have a ton of reps on Kano, but does still know how the deck works. And we get into a spot where we basically just like take a weighted coin flip, like a 70-30, and I get there and win the game. So 3-0. Probably locked for top 8 at this point, but maybe not. I think if I go 3-2, there's like a chance I don't make it, but incredibly unlikely. However, top 8's not the goal. We need top 4 to get our nationals invite. Round 4, I play against another Dromai. So there's only 4 illusionists in the entire field. There's 2 Dromai and 1 Prism, and I run into 3 of the 4 of them, which is unlucky because Kano generally doesn't want to see illusionist. So, sit down, draw my opponent, and he goes, man, I've only played against Kano. Like, man, I've only played against Kano like once. And I'm like, you don't say. So we end up playing the game, and I have to like explain what my cards do to my opponent, which if you're playing Kano is bad news for your opponent because you kind of have to know what's going on in order to like deal with him. And there's a spot where I'm like, okay, combo turn. And I start my combo and I go Aether Wildfire for 5. And that's the card you have to block as much of as possible. My opponent has like a lot of Arcane Barrier. And I'm kind of like throwing shit at the wall, just hoping it works here because I'm gonna be honest, I got kind of blasted early game. He started turn 0 with double tome, like double tome into Vincerakai, into other stuff. Like it's got Themi, right? Like it's been actually a really tough game. He's got like Arcane Barrier 7 out because of all the Ash Wings, double rake the Embers and stuff. So I'm like, okay, combo turn. So I go Aether Wildfire for 5. And he looks at his 3 cards in hand, and he looks at the card, and he looks at me, and he goes, yeah, okay, I'll take it. And his buddy who's watching the game goes, because yeah, I'll take it in response to Aether Wildfire is not the correct answer. I don't care what you have in your hand. You could have Exodia. Taking the damage from Aether Wildfire is not the move. So his friend just goes, and I'm like, oh my God. And I'd also banished this card called Aether Quickening, which is basically Scalding Rain with extra text. The extra text says if it does more than 2 damage, you get Go again. And all of this cycle that is like if it does X damage, it gets Y, never matters. Why Aether Wildfire of all cards in Kano? Okay, Aether Wildfire says if it does damage, however much damage it does, you add it on to every other source of arcane damage spells that you cast this turn. So that's that like multiplicative effect. How have the locals not prepped into Kano knowing you're coming? They're semi-locals. They're from like an hour and a half away. So I don't think they know that I'm going to be there or who I am or whatever. Anyway, so I have this card that says if it does more than 2 damage, I get Go again. And I have this really cool line where I'm like, I'm so excited that this card finally gets to be relevant that I get to cast it, hit for like 7 or whatever. It gets Go again. And I have Tome of Aetherwind in my hand. And then I could cast it and draw 2 cards. And then I could put the Blazing Aether I have in my hand on top of Ragamuffins and Blazing Aether and do like infinite damage. And I'm like, oh my God, this will be so cool, right? So I take this weird style of line to make it so that I get the Go again, and then I Tome, and then Blazing Aether, instead of just putting Blazing Aether on top and killing my opponent, because I thought it'd be fun to do the cool thing. Except some of the astute viewers may have noticed it's not my turn. I can't have Go again. It's my opponent's turn. So it hits, and I cast Tome, and I draw 2 cards, and they're both reds. So my hand is red, 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 which means, oh, I just screwed myself trying to do the cool thing. But then the guy watching goes, hey, it's not your turn. You can't have Go again. And I was like, oh my God, you're right. So I call the judge, right? I call the judge. Judge is a friend of mine. And I'm like, hey, Mr. Judge Man, here's what happened. But then I also tell him, I'm like, listen, it's like, we need to make sure, or I would like the penalty, if you can make this happen, to be something that allows my opponent to choose how this kind of resolves. Because basically, if the penalty is that they back up and then they give me a penalty, then I'm going to win the game because I'll just put Blazing Aether on top and kill my opponent. And I don't want that to happen. If you're just like, okay, yeah, you have to put 2 cards back, go, then I'm going to win. And I don't want that. So I'm like, okay, can we do something where I like show my opponent the cards, right? And that's the penalty he ends up going with. We show my opponent the 3 cards. He gets to choose 2 of them and put them on the top or the bottom. So he picks Blazing Aether and another Tome and like puts them on the bottom. And basically I don't get there, right? And it's totally my fault. I would have won the game had I just taken the normal route, but I wanted to be fancy and I lose the game because of it. Is what it is, right? No big deal. So that puts me at 3-1. I do feel bad because I cheated and I did not beat the cheat. I had a really bad headache at this point, and that just kind of like happens to me with card games sometimes, where I'm at a long tournament, I get like very tense, and then I get really bad headaches. And so I'm struggling mentally a bit. Round 5, I play against my friend Patrick, who's on Victor, and he is 4-0. He's the only undefeated still. And this matchup is not good for Victor. Guardian into Wizard has always been like very Wizard favored, but Victor is slower and more defensively oriented. And being more defensive is very bad into Kano because you just give him more time. And the more time you give Wizards, the more likely they are to kill you. So it's a really rough matchup for him. We start playing, and he just does his best. I win the game in like 4 minutes. You know, it is what it is. It's a really bad matchup. So we're locked for top 8. However, I'm fucking dying. My head is hurting so bad. So I turn in my deck list, and I sort my deck and everything, hand it to the judge, because he has to deck check all the decks in top 8. And then across the street is a smoke shop. Now, OGs will possibly remember the time that I went to that smoke shop, asked for something with no THC in it that would relax my muscles, basically the exact same situation I'm in now, and then they gave me a THC product, and I ended up super high the whole tournament. So I went back, and I was like, hey, it was a different guy working there. I was like, hey, man, I explained to him what's going on. I'm so tense. It's so bad that if I move my neck like this, I'm just getting muscle spasms. And I have a horrible headache because of it. I really just need something to loosen my muscles that has no THC in it. And he looks at me and he's like, yeah, man, you want Kratom. And I'm like, what? Kratom? And he just walks over and he points to like a jar of what looks like powdered dirt. And he's like, yeah, Kratom. And I'm like, okay, how does this work? And he's like, okay, yeah, so have you ever taken it before? And I'm like, no. And he's like, have you eaten? And I go, no. Or, oh, yeah, yes, sorry, I have eaten. Yeah, I've eaten a lot. And he's like, okay, you want probably like 3 grams? No more than 3. 2.5 maybe. And I'm like, okay, yeah, give me like 2.5, right? And he goes, okay. So he like opens this jar of powdered dirt looking stuff. There's like 8 of these jars with different like named labels on them that just sound made up. And I'm like, how do I take this? Right? It looks like dirt. And he's like, okay, yeah, you're gonna have to buy like an orange juice or an apple juice, cause it tastes like shit. I'm like, oh, this is getting better and better. I'm like, okay, I'll take an orange juice, please. And he's like, you got to drink a little bit of it first. So I like drink a little bit of the orange juice and I hand it to him. And he takes this like, he starts measuring out this kratom powder and he puts it into like a little funnel and gets it in the orange juice and he grabs it. And I go to grab it to mix it up. And he's like, no, I'll do it. You really got to mix this stuff up. And so, yeah, he holds it and he's just like a bartender, just going. Just over and over, just mixing. And then he like kind of stops and I go to take it and then he just switches to the other side and like continues mixing. And I'm like, wow, you really got to mix it up. Yeah. And he's like, dude, this tastes so bad. Like, oh, okay. That's great. So I go to like ring it up and I like pay and he like presses a couple buttons, right? And he's like, okay, put your card in and then starts shaking it again. And then I like put my card in and he's like, okay, yeah, you know, beep boop bop. Shakes it some more. And then he finally hands it to me. And it's like, now the orange juice is like this sickly, like brown green color with like some orange coming through. It looks like sludge, right? And it's like thicker because you filled it with dirt powder. And so I'm like, all right, thanks, man. Do I just drink the whole thing? And he's like, yeah, you want to drink the whole thing. It might make you a little sleepy. And I was like, okay. So I just start drinking this like swamp orange juice thing just in the hopes that it can make my headache not as bad, right? And I get through probably half of it and I'm just like it's so bad. It's so bad. So I finished most of it. No Google, just blind trust. Now I did Google it, which didn't help. I don't know if you've ever tried to Google like an herb before that people use recreationally. There's a lot of information and a lot of it contradicts each other. Also, I don't make the best decisions when I have a headache. I will do anything to get rid of a headache. So I finished most of it. I don't drink all of it. At the very end, I just kind of toss out the last bit because I was like, I still have to play top 8. Maybe I should like not drink it all. So I get back and people look at me and they go, "Oh, Brooks is looking for you." And Brooks is like the judge. And I'm like, that's not good. That's not good. So Brooks calls me over. He's like, "Come here." And then he calls me over and then we walk a little bit away from people. And I'm like, that's not good. Like, all right, there's an issue. And he's like, yeah, there's an issue. You have Ironhide Gauntlet on your deck list. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, where is it? I'm like, well, I don't have it. I'm just never presenting it. You know, like I just needed an 80th card. And he's like, you don't need 80 cards. You need minimum 60 cards, maximum 80. But all the cards you write in your deck list have to be there. Do you have an Ironhide Gauntlet? And I was like, nope. I don't have one. It's at home somewhere. And so I get what's called an IP2 penalty. An IP2 is an intellect penalty for 2 turns. Intellect is how many cards you draw. So instead of drawing 4 cards, I only draw 3 for 2 turns. And if you've played Flesh and Blood, you know that that is very brutal, right? I just lost 25% of my value in first 2 turns. That's big. However, I'm playing against another warrior. I'm playing against Dorinthia in top 8, which is an incredibly good matchup. So I'm like, well, this is going to happen. At least it happens against the Dorinthia, right? So I sit down. I'm feeling a little, like, tingly. I think it's the kratom. I'm not sure, but my fingertips are feeling weird. I'm slurring my words a lot. I keep, like, dropping cards and stuff. But I sit down. I start playing. I only have 3 cards for 2 turns. And what do you know? It's not an issue, and I blast my opponent. Sorry, Steven. Just a horrible matchup for him, honestly. And I was pretty fortunate. So we're on to semis. We qualify for nationals. We're in there. This means I get at least a box of cards, which is pretty cool, like a booster box. But I really want that gold foil. That's what I'm here for. I watch everybody else's games, and my next... Is penalty over? Yeah, the penalty's over. I watch everybody else's games. And it's looking like my next opponent is going to be either a Katsu or something else. Spoiler alert, it was the Katsu. I don't want it to be the Katsu because I know the Katsu player. He's a good player. And Katsu can be kind of a tough matchup against Kano because it has incredibly bursty turns where it can do like 30 plus damage. I only have 30 health. You see the issue. Plus, Katsu can play up to AB3 pretty easily, right? So I sit down. We start playing our game, and my deck just shits the bed. It's just everything's going wrong. I'm just drawing reds. I'm banishing blues. That sounds like nothing to people who don't play Flesh and Blood, but if you do play Flesh and Blood, you know what I mean, especially if you play Kano. Drawing red, banishing blues. And then on my opponent's side, his deck, also shitting the bed. He's just drawing blues, not hitting the reds. Things just aren't really working out for him. So both of us are just like fumbling and limping and trying to like do enough damage to each other, but neither of us can. Then my opponent starts to hit the surging strikes or whatever they're called. The really good starter for Katsu. He hits them a couple turns in a row and absolutely puts my back against the wall. I have a turn where I end up with like a 5-card hand plus an arsenal, so a 6-card hand, but like 3 of them are reds because my tome drew double reds. I like scried tome to the top, cast it, drew 2, red, god damn it. And there's a spot where I'm like, okay, I can pull the trigger now, but if my opponent has a blue, I lose the game. And if I don't have a blue on top, I lose the game. And I decided not to pull the trigger, which is weird when you have like 6 cards in Kano, but it ends up being the right decision because my opponent had a yellow and I did not have a blue on top. So we keep playing, and I have to try to combo again. I just draw red on top. I banish blues. I'm looking for like Blazing Aether or Tome or Aether Flare or anything, and I don't find it. and then I flip up. So I tell my opponent, good game. He does beat me. Ends up winning the entire event, actually. And I flip like the top 4 cards off the top to see what I almost got to. And it was like Blazing Aether, Tome of the Aetherwind, Aether Wildfire, Aether Flare. Like the nuts, right? Exactly what I've been wanting to hit all game. And I was just like 1 card away. But it happens, you know. It happens. So I got my Nationals qualification. I'm going to be playing another RTN over the next couple weeks just to try to get my gold foils and stuff and to get practice. But I want to talk about Kano for a little bit because I love playing Kano. I like him so much. I think he's so fun. However, I'm a bit worried that playing Kano is kind of holding me back in a way because you can only win so much with Kano. The issue is like a lot of times you bring Kano to a tournament, maybe you play well or whatever. You're going to have games where you just lose and it's not your fault. You just need a blue on top and it's a red, or vice versa, and you just don't win. Or your opponent has a pretty good start and there's nothing you can do about it because you only have 30 HP and your armor doesn't block. It's like it's tough. So you do get some free wins as well, but there are some like free losses and it sucks. Icelander wasn't really like that, which was really, really nice. Why I liked Icelander. And I know it's weird to say like, oh, I think my hero might be holding me back after I just took like second at a battle hardened and I top 4'd my RTN or whatever. But there was a spot where I was like, oh, if I needed to win every single match today, I wouldn't be confident in doing it. But if I had to win every single match back when I was playing Icelander, I would be confident that I could do it. And that isn't like the best feeling to have for your hero. So I'm wondering if maybe I should start trying to branch out and do other things. The issue is Kano is by far the most fun hero in the game right now that I can play because I can't play Icelander because she's LL'd. So we'll see what I end up doing. But yeah, that's it for my story time. The Kratom ended up being kind of a nothing burger, gonna be honest. Maybe we went a little bit too light on my dosage, but I just was like slurring for like an hour and I wasn't very coordinated, and then that was it. So yeah, have I considered Prism? I've been practicing a lot of Prism. That deck is very, very, very hard. Very hard, and I'm not winning with it as much as I would like to. But yeah, that's the story time. Did the pain go away? It did help that. It did help that. I did loosen up a little bit, so that's good. But yeah, that's story time. There's going to be some more story times. I'm thinking tomorrow we might do the LOR Invitational. And yeah, thank you everybody for coming by. See you next time.